Yeah, guys. So our story today is about Barnabas and Paul, and in the story, we've done some stories through the book of Acts, and I think the last story we did, Paul was still Saul. So from the time we left our hero, his name has changed, and it's also interesting. Just we're going to see this as we kind of continue in this particular story because we'll be doing the rest of this, not the rest of this chapter, but I've kind of broken the story up into a couple of parts. Uh, it's interesting because at this point of the Paul and Barnabas journey, it's still Barnabas and Paul. But that Barnabas is still, kind of the main player, right? He's still the main character, which is interesting as you see this, this progression, not only of their relationship, but of Paul's growing into more ministry authority. So just before this story, they were in Antioch, and it's hysterical. You're like, I don't want to go anywhere with these guys because everywhere they go, they get yelled at, they get cussed at, people threaten them, they get chased out of wherever they're going. And you're going, no, thank you. I do not want to join your denomination. Uh, I'll stick with a denomination where if people say, oh, I'm not interested, I get to whine and cry and feel persecuted. But these guys, they're apparently a little bit more bold than we are, because they have the same message we have, but people either responded or strongly rejected, which is not what we get, right? So here is our story from God's word. In Lystra, a man was sitting who had no strength in his feet. He had never walked, and he had been lame from birth. And he listened as Paul spoke. And so after looking directly at him, Paul saw that he had the faith to be healed. And so Paul said in a loud voice, stand up on your feet. And the man jumped up and began to walk around. And there's our story from God's word. So like I said, this is a short one, right? So I'm going to get you guys to kind of help me retell this story. So in Lystra, a man was sitting, and there were three things that described him. He was without
lame.
Yeah, he was
without strength in his.
Yeah, he was without strength in his feet. He had never what?
Never walked.
Yeah, he never walked. And Bev, what was the third thing?
He was lame in his feet.
He was lame for how long?
Since birth.
Yeah, he was lame from birth. And what was he doing?
He was listening.
Yeah, he was listening to Paul. And Paul, he was looking.
He saw that.
Yeah, he was looking at him. And what did he see, Diane?
The guy had. He saw that the guy had faith to be healed.
Yeah, faith to be healed. So Paul told the guys, he goes, hey, go get this guy. I got something I want to tell him.
Nah, just in a loud voice right in front of everybody.
Oh,
God and everybody.
Yeah, in a loud voice, he said,
Get up.
Yeah, stand up on your feet. And so the man
jumped up.
Yeah, he jumped up, and then
he
walked around.
Yeah, he walked around. So there's our story from God's word. So what do you think it might have been like for this guy? And we're not, at this point of the story, we're not told his age. What do you think it might have been like for this guy to never have been able to walk? I mean, this is if you're lame in your feet, that means crutches aren't going to help, right? There's no such thing as wheelchairs in those days. So what do you think life might have been like for this guy? Oh, I think I just froze up.
I think lonely and sad, disappointing.
Yeah.
I mean, even if he didn't know what it was like, he could see other people walking, and that would be hard to know that you couldn't, even though you wanted to.
I mean, he's got people that care about him because they brought him to this event. Obviously, he wouldn't have gotten to wherever Paul is speaking unless Paul's either in his house or somebody brought him. So he has people that care, but it's a smaller life. And not very much, unless you're wealthy, not much of a chance of marriage, children.
Yeah. Ladies, I'm in my office right now, which is usually has the best internet of any place I go. But for whatever reason, my internet, can you all tell, am I kind of freezing up?
No, you're fine.
I'm not. Okay.
None of that. Wah, wah, wah,
okay. Then I'm going to keep it where it is.
It made a funny
We've got
noise,
three different networks here. So I was going to shift networks, but as long as I'm not interrupting for you guys, I'm good then. Well, let's look at the first part of this story. In Lystra, a man was sitting who was without strength in his feet. He had never walked, and he'd been lame from birth. And he listened as Paul spoke. So I find it interesting. What do we learn about this guy? It says a man was sitting who was without strength in his feet. It just says a man was sitting. It doesn't say a beggar or other description. So what might we learn a bit about this guy? That, I mean, do you think if he'd been a beggar, there would have been more of a description there?
Yeah, I think it would have been mentioned because it does other places when there's beggars. They say they're beggars.
Thing shows the need. So this guy must be from a family that can support a grown man without having to go beyond the family to handle the expense. And he's able to sit. So even though he's got a problem with his feet, he's able to sit.
Yeah.
He's not a guy that has to recline all the time.
Yeah.
Seems to be
that's a good kid.
And he liked to listen.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do we learn about this guy that he was listening? I mean, how exciting do you think his life probably was?
Well, that probably was the main thing he could do, would be to listen. He couldn't go anywhere. So whoever was around, he'd listen, most likely. And he must have had spiritual interests, so much to listen to Paul. And so that.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, somebody strong-armed you into coming, Baptist could have brought him or something. But there's a good chance that he wanted to, both people were willing to bring him in. He wanted to be
there. Yeah, and what do we learn about the Lord from the fact that in this story he shares, okay, he was without strength in his feet, he had never walked, and he was lame from birth. I mean, does that seem like a little bit of overkill? Honestly,
it does. Seems like they could have. The fact that he was lame in his feet and couldn't walk, Josie's lame.
I think it sort of says that there's a range of conditions people can have. And let's be clear, like as soon as you began to tell the story, I saw in my head a man that used to come to my church, and he could get around. His feet at birth had been not aligned properly.
Yeah.
He had club feet. And so when he got here, he was put together with the specialist, and he ended up getting, I think, 8-10 surgeries. it's no simple thing.
Yeah.
And that was to correct somebody who could walk, didn't have to have crutches, but got around with a lot of laboring. And pretty much just had the feet was the only thing that was messed up. So I can't imagine quite how messed up the feet had to be, or how much has to happen for that no walking, no, because I would think if you could get around with sticks, you'd do that. So
Right.
this guy's, it's bad enough. He just can't do this at all. And so we want to make that clear. That's who got healed.
Well, and it says he listened as Paul spoke. And so Paul's message is, we're not told exactly what it was at this point, but because of the examples we've had in the past, do you all think it's safe to say it was a pretty clear gospel presentation of some kind?
Most likely.
I'm wondering if maybe it includes healing.
That
Paul is telling stories of Jesus and how Jesus healed people. He's telling stories of things that have happened in the church. So not just what a conceptual presentation of the gospel, but a narrative presentation that probably includes healing.
Okay. Well, so this guy stayed and listened, right? And now obviously he couldn't run away, right?
But he could nap.
But I mean, he listened. He didn't ask anybody, hey, listen, I don't want to hear about, if there is a God and I'm in this shape, but he didn't ask anybody to take him away. He stayed and listened. So what might that tell us about the guy?
Well, think a lot of times you can show up to hear a guest speaker, right? Somebody who's from out of town, and you've heard, pretty interesting things about him, and then you get there and you're like, well, this is not all I thought it was gonna be. Right? Like, okay, do I have to sit here? I could slip out, but then my friend that invited me, so even if you can move, who invited you is gonna be like, oh, and I thought he was so great, Diane. Yeah. So he's engaged, just because you want to go, that means you get there, you're gonna be like, oh, this is so great. He's liking it.
Okay, yeah, he's liking it. All right. Well, did he have any other choice as a guy that had been crippled from birth? How could he have responded to a message about a God that supposedly is in control of all that stuff?
He could have been bitter and mad at God of how his whole life had been like. He could have been like, I don't want to hear this. And he could have tuned it out and thought of something else.
Yeah, even if he was stuck, I hadn't thought about that. It's just like, let me go to that mind place that he probably had gone to a lot of times. Well, let's look at the second part of this story. So after looking directly at him, Paul saw that he had the faith to be healed. And so Paul said in a loud voice, stand up on your feet. And the man jumped up and began to walk around. And so we'll stop right there. So I find it interesting in this story. First of all, what do we learn about Paul? That he is able to look at somebody and discern what is going on spiritually inside of them. What does that show you about him?
He had a lot of discernment. He had a lot of wisdom. He was tuned in with the Spirit and the Lord to read that so clearly. A man who probably looked somewhat pitiful, but he was listening intently, and the man might have been looking at him and eagerly. That look in his face might have helped him read that.
Oh, okay.
But he had a lot of discernment.
Yeah.
As an instructor, a former instructor who's looked out on many crowds of bewildered, hungry, distracted people with phones in their laps. the person who's like following you, they're not lost, they're not like hoping to get it, but that's really tracking with you and topic sentence, I think I could do this, is that face. You may not read all the other faces that well,
Right.
but that face is the one that stands out. And maybe Paul gets a better response rate.
Yeah.
But I think there's a mixture of discernment and that this just makes your face look different.
He'd seen a lot of faces that didn't believe too. The
Yes.
Pharisees and the
Yeah.
Sadducees and the scribes and stuff. He kind of knew what their look was like as well. They're scheming like, how can we kill this guy? The evil and the meanness in their
Yes.
faces.
Yeah.
and eyes.
Ooh, are those daggers I see in your eyes?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because we've looked at a number of stories, right? And we've talked about a number of stories where there was healing taking place. Can you think of any stories up to this point that we have done that the faith to be healed was required of the person who was to be healed as opposed to the person who was providing the healing?
In post, Jesus says to a number of people, your faith has made you well, go in peace.
Yes.
So Jesus senses faith in people and approaches them. I think often that is simply from the person coming and engaging. So the person comes to Jesus or the person makes a verbal request. And here it seems to be that the faith is simply seen in a different way. It's perceived in a different way, as opposed to the person speaking, or he can see it, this receptiveness. Kind of like when you look out at a group and you want to volunteer, right? And you look out and there's all the people that suddenly are not sure if their shoelaces are tied.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And then there's that face, and you're like, they so want to be up here. They want to volunteer. I think it's that kind of a face. I so want to be a part of that thing you're talking about.
Well, let me ask you a question. So here it says that Paul looked at him and saw he had the faith to be healed. So based on this story, do you think we need to make it a doctrinal imperative, and always, if somebody needs to be healed, it depends on how much faith they have? When you compare this to other stories.
Well,
let's just go ahead and say that they have to have had their condition since birth, or it won't work.
Yeah. Ben, what were you going to say?
I was going to say all it takes is a faith the size of a mustard seed to move a mountain. So I don't think the size of the faith matters. You just need to have the tiniest little belief that it can happen. So I don't think we can make a doctrine about how much faith.
I think that Paul is just seeing this is the time for this. This guy's ready. God has caused me to notice this. I should go for it, right? He's been speaking. And what causes you, when you're speaking and you're preaching to a group, what causes you to shift gears and do something else? I think it's the seeing the faith that causes Paul to go, ooh, this is the thing that's going to happen next.
Well, you mentioned the thing that's going to happen next. So Paul, it says he says in a loud voice, and I always want to say shouts, but that's not what it just says in a loud voice, which my wife, if she was listening to this, would say, oh, so he's talking like you. Because she always gets after me for my loud voice. Was he taking any kind of risk by doing that?
Well, yeah.
What do you see there?
The man might have been too afraid to move. He never had been able to before.
Yeah.
And even though
Yeah.
he had faith, he still might have been afraid or reluctant.
Who says the power's there? Just because the guy's got the faith, who says that, Paul's words are gonna bring those two together? This could be an egg on your face kind of a thing, right? The guy starts to get up, and roll up,
Yeah.
just falls over, right?
Well, and what other choices did Paul have? I want to go. I want to get back there, Diane. I want to talk about that in just a second. Even before that, so I mean, could Paul have handled this in a little different way to maybe minimize some of that risk?
Well, yeah, I could invite some other of the elders if I brought. Paul usually doesn't travel by himself,
Yeah.
so bring my traveling companion. So if it falls apart, the egg is spread over more faces. Get somebody if there's already a church here. I don't know if there's a church here, to kind of spread it out. Bring the guy to a separate room, so there aren't all these. Because I mean, if this guy gets healed, everybody knows what his status is. We don't need witnesses to know that he's healed.
Yeah.
So yeah, go full risk, Paul. Go ahead.
He could have also made sure the man was ready and asked him,
Mhm.
said, "Do you want to be healed? Are you ready today?"
Yeah. I'm thinking he could have just kept on preaching, and then after everybody left, I mean, that guy's not going anywhere. He's kind of there. Then he could have gone over to him and said, "Hey, man, here you go." Or he could ask Barnabas was there. He could ask Barnabas to keep speaking, and then go sit down next to the guy and go, "Hey, dude, listen, do you want to be healed? I think you've got the faith to do this." But he didn't do any of those things. Instead, he said with a loud voice in front of the whole crowd. What might that show? Could that show us anything about Paul and his intentions? Was it just do you think this was just about the healing, or that the healing was going to be used for something even more than just the guy walking?
Well, I mean, he doesn't even say. I mean, there must be some eye contact. He doesn't know a name. He doesn't say, "Hey, you." I mean, there's probably some people in the room that aren't even sure who he's speaking to at the point that he says it. Because what does he say?
Stand up on your feet.
Yeah, I mean, so it could be that, that some in the back are like, why does he want somebody to stand up? Is he going to use them for an example or something? There may be some folks that don't even know that he's speaking to this guy. Because, you're in the back and you see somebody, you can't necessarily tell that they made eye contact with the lame guy.
So Paul says this, and the guy jumps up and begins to walk around. So what's the miracle here?
That the man was healed who had never walked. And seeing that power would create another miracle, people believing.
Okay. So
if he'd taken him to a room like we talked about before, then even though they might have found out about it, they wouldn't have experienced the wowness of it.
Yeah. I love that word, the wowness. I like that.
It's a great gift to the people. Because if you go to that other room and you're like, I was there, the guy was in the room, Paul was in the room, and then they went somewhere else and he was healed, and then I saw the healed guy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's good enough for most everybody, right? Like, woohoo, I was there and I saw the guy, I knew the guy, he got healed. I saw the guy that did the healing, I just didn't see the healing itself. I am still gonna tell each and every person that I know on the planet, I was there when this happened.
Yeah, because it's more real if you're there. It's more exciting.
But No, I said, I'm gonna tell, even if I don't see it happen.
Right.
But what a gift to see that, to see the man's instant response, to see his face when he takes his first steps of his whole life.
Okay, first day. So he's been lame from birth. So his feet are healed. What's another miracle?
His
He
legs.
can walk.
His legs were healed because
Yeah.
I
He's
mean,
way high up off the ground now because, when you first learn to walk, you have bones that are like rubber and you're very close to the ground. God has made it that way. If I were the guy that came with him, I would have been up on my feet too. Like, whoa, are you okay?
yeah.
And I'm like, I'm gonna make sure that you're not like a swaying tower.
Yeah. Well, and I find it interesting. It doesn't say he got up and he walked. It says
jump.
he jumped up and he walked.
Huh.
So do you think, does that give you any idea of the guy's emotional state here?
No.
He was ecstatic.
Oh, maybe that. Yeah. I think it's that joy of movement. I mean, it's joy in being healed, but there's also a pleasure when your body hasn't worked and then it does. Even if whether you've never experienced it or you experienced it before. And my friend that had the 8-10 surgeries.
Yeah.
After that, and it took really quite a while, it got discouraging there because they kept making these little adjustments to get the tendons. The tendons to get them stretched. And for a little while, it looked like, oh, he's not going to really get it. He's going to have more than he had before, but he's not going to be normal. And then I would see him and I'm like, well, what did you do? How's your week been? He was a physics grad student. And he would say, and I went for a walk.
Oh, wow.
It was so good.
Wow. Oh, that's.
And he would just tell you, like, that would be the highlight of a week, was I went for a walk. And then his wife came back. He had not been married, but he had a friend and they decided they were going to marry. And she came over and be like,
wow.
My wife and I went for a walk.
Whew. I apologize. I'm responding to something my wife sent me. So you guys matter.
Yeah.
She scares me. Well, in this story, we talked a little bit about the fact that Paul took a risk to do this in a loud way, a very public way, so that what was done would have a greater impact.
Yeah.
Today, when we're doing things in the name of Christ, are there still risks required to have greater results? I mean, is that still a thing?
I think so. When we stay in our comfort zone, we're not risking as much or being as effective, not doing all that we could be doing.
Well, I wonder, what can you guys think of that would be kind of taking a risk on the part of a believer today?
I think of Mark has a cousin who's is 60s, in his 60s, and he had to retire from he had to retire to treat some cancer. His wife has some health issues, but they took in their daughter's children who are under the age of 10, plus the other child that the children had all been with their dad. And they took an extra kid who was not their blood relative. And I think the faith that takes to like, I have the energy of the people that are now here, take these back.
Yeah.
And doing that. The chance to fall on your face in exhaustion is right there. and yet they love these children and
Yeah.
make them feel a security that they've never felt before. And I think those kids don't really know grandma and grandpa
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
are working so hard to make this happen.
Yeah, we've got a family in our church that they have their grandkids that they're raising as their children, and like, whew. Well, I wonder, can you think of something in your life or life of somebody you know where God is kind of, I love your words, Bev, pushed you out of the comfort zone to get you to, or them, to serve in some capacity or do something or stretch yourself a little bit.
You do.
Oh, with stories.
Yes, going to other countries to share. And you even talked about how that was out of your comfort zone.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. A little harder this time too, as I'm getting ready in a couple of months to go out, and honestly, it's a little bit more of a struggle this time. I'm not struggling with whether or not I'm going to do it. That's not what I'm saying. But it's just like, wow, I'd really like to stay here in my church and just sit in my office and, and do things via Zoom. So, yeah.
Well, I think of when you go to one of the Simply the Story trainings, and people who may be very proficient in some other style of speaking or presenting, and they come in, and this one that's coming up in Dearborn, I've been told that the senior pastor is coming to the same workshop as his
Yeah.
congregants, and that can be a little scary for both sides. Both the like, oh, I have to do this in front of my minister, and like, well, what if all the others do it better than me, and you're the minister, and it can happen. And I saw that last night. I was looking at the group from uh, that Dan is working with, and there's a group of ladies, and they have a supervisor, and and he's being critiqued in front of them, and that takes uh, real guts to put yourself out there and say,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
willing to do the same training with these other people that I supervise. If they end up better than me, they do, but
Yeah.
I'm willing to. I want to learn and I want to serve, and so I'm going to do this thing with the people that I supervise.
Well, I wonder in this story, is there something the Lord might be speaking to you about, that, some action step, something, you're like, I might need to do this because of what the Lord's showing me in this passage.
I think that today that people, the women in my Bible study who are great, they're just every single one of them is great, and they hear every week what my current story goals are and what I'm doing, and they're just like, "Pam, you think you're going to be a story evangelist?" And I'm not entirely sure what they mean by that, like, but anyway, but I've seen them, that this week my friend told the story to two people, but I think part of it is that I'm there to help people do that. And I'm like, it doesn't have do this with your grandkids. What impact are you going to have with them? Who else do you know? The woman that I texted her and I said, that's great that you did with them. I mean, their responses, you never know how they're going to respond. But she's going to be seeing her 90-year-old mom and her sisters next week. She's going to go up there and help her mom get settled after surgery. And it's like, yeah, let me encourage you to take those risks. So it's not always when we hear this that we're supposed to do it. Sometimes it is, but sometimes we're supposed to help somebody else.
Yeah, to encourage somebody else. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Because you may meet some raving extrovert Birch that you help unleash on the world in the next few weeks.
Yeah,
you never know.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Well, thank you, ladies. This story is in Acts chapter 14, verses 8 through 10. It's only 3 verses. I was doing the math. And yet we've talked for a few minutes about this story. So the response to this story is not what you would hope for if you were a preacher, but we'll talk about that some next week. Also, if you guys could be praying, we'll talk next week a little bit about possibility of shifting time, if that helps folks. And then I am probably going to need to take all of June. I'll be gone pretty much. So I'll be in Amsterdam, and I'm going to leave a little bit early because I want to go to Herrnhut, to the place where the Moravian prayer movement started.
Wow.
And I had no idea, but I'm going to be there almost to the day of the 300th anniversary.
Wow.
Wow.
Which was, I was like, I was already planning to go, but I started looking and it's like, oh, wow, that could be good. That could be bad, because it means there might be other people there. But I don't think it's going to be people typically don't get as excited about prayer meetings as they do about other things.
Well, they're starting to get more excited, I think.
But
yes,
I just know so many people that, of the people that I know that travel abroad, that have wanted to go there.
Yes.
Believers said. So it's a real, like, people from all over the world love to go
I'm
there.
pretty pumped.
So you mentioned, so you're going to be going to Amsterdam and then to that great metropolis of Hemet.
Yes. So from one extreme to the other. So I'm going to go ahead and end this now.